German Shepherd was used to pull a heavy cart without rest. What baby did next left everyone in tears. The story you're about to listen to will break your heart and then put it back together. What this innocent child did for a suffering dog will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. A bone-chilling whimper cut through the peaceful countryside air. 5-year-old Lily Morgan froze mid-step, her small hand still clutching the dandelion she'd been about to blow. Something was wrong. The sound came again, a pained, desperate cry that made her blood run cold. Lily stood quietly in her family's sprawling backyard, bordered by tall grass that swayed gently in the summer breeze. Her home wasn't fancy, just a weathered 2-story farmhouse with chipped blue paint and creaky stairs, but it was filled with love. At least, that's what her father always said. The strange noise grew louder, metallic clanking mixed with labored breathing. Lily's curious green eyes scanned the distant dirt road that wound past their property. Then she saw it. A German Shepherd, its coat dulled with dirt and neglect, was straining to pull a cart loaded with what looked like heaps of scrap metal. The dog's legs trembled with each step, and even from this distance, Lily could see its ribs protruding through matted fur. A heavy chain attached to a crude harness cut into the animal's flesh, leaving raw marks visible even from where she stood. Lily's heart pounded against her chest as the dog collapsed mid-step, its legs buckling beneath the weight. The cart jerked to a halt, metal scraps rattling ominously. The dog didn't get up. "Dad!" Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. She rarely shouted. In fact, she rarely spoke at all. No response came from the house behind her. Her father, Thomas, was probably still fixing the leaky sink, radio blaring country music to drown out the frustration of too tight pipes and too little money. Lily's small, bare feet moved before her mind could catch up. One step, then another. The grass tickled between her toes as she moved toward the fence separating their property from the road. Her pink sundress fluttered around her knees like butterfly wings. The dog's eyes, golden brown and filled with a pain that seemed too deep for just physical suffering, locked with hers. Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that made Lily's chest tighten. "I'll help you," she whispered, though the dog couldn't possibly hear her from this distance. Turning around, Lily ran back to the house, her heart pounding like a tiny drummer in her chest. The screen door creaked as she pushed it open, the familiar smell of her father's coffee and motor oil greeting her. "Dad!" she called again, louder this time. Thomas Morgan was bent awkwardly under the kitchen sink, only his legs visible. At 42, he was still strong despite the lines that had begun to crease his face after Lily's mother left 3 years ago. Grease streaked his hands and his faded jeans, evidence of his work as the town's best, and only, mechanic. "What is it, Lily Pad?" he asked, voice strained from his uncomfortable position. "Can it wait 5 minutes? I've almost got this pipe fixed." Lily didn't answer. Instead, she tugged frantically at her father's pant leg, pulling with all the strength her small body could muster. "Whoa!" Thomas slid out from under the sink, a wrench still clutched in his hand. His expression softened when he saw his daughter's face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lily rarely showed this much emotion, not since the day her mother packed her bags and drove away without so much as a backward glance. Since then, Lily had retreated into herself, speaking only when necessary, communicating mainly through nods, shakes, and the occasional whispered sentence. Now her eyes were wide, tears threatening to spill, small chest heaving with urgency. She pointed frantically toward the back door. "Dog," she managed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Hurt." Thomas set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a nearby rag. "A hurt dog? Where?" Lily grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the door. Her urgency was palpable, electric. All right," Thomas said, allowing himself to be led. "Show me this dog." Outside, Lily pointed toward the road where the German Shepherd still lay motionless beside the cart. Thomas squinted, shading his eyes against the sun. "That's probably just old Mr. Redford's farm dog, Lily. They work those animals hard around here. Nothing we can—" But Lily was already moving, pushing open the gate that separated their yard from the field beyond. Her bare feet carried her through the tall grass, seemingly untroubled by the occasional thorn or sharp rock. "Lily, wait!" Thomas called, rushing after her. "Come back here. You can't just run off like that." Lily didn't slow down. Something about the dog's eyes had called to her, awakened something deep inside her that had been dormant since her mother left. A need to protect, to help, to care. As she got closer, the reality of the dog's condition became brutally clear. Blood matted its paws where the skin had split from pulling the heavy cart. The harness wasn't just uncomfortable, it was cruel, designed with metal pieces that dug into the animal's flesh with each movement. The chain was rusted, leaving orange-brown stains on the dog's neck. "Oh my God," Thomas whispered as he caught up, his hand coming to rest protectively on Lily's shoulder. "Stay back, Lily. We don't know if it's dangerous." But Lily shook her head firmly. The dog's eyes followed her, not with aggression, but with a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. It made no attempt to growl or move away as she approached. "Poor thing," Thomas said, crouching down beside the cart. "Someone's been working this dog half to death." The cart was filled with scrap metal, old car parts, twisted bits of fence, a broken bicycle frame, things that would fetch a few dollars at the recycling center at best, not worth the suffering they had caused. Thomas examined the crude harness, his mechanic's hands gentle as they assessed the damage. "This is animal cruelty, plain and simple." A tag hung from the dog's collar, half hidden by dirt and blood. Thomas carefully turned it over. "Property of Victor Lanes," he read aloud, his voice hardening. "Lanes, that old hermit who lives out by the abandoned quarry." Lily nodded, though she barely knew who her father was talking about. She'd heard whispers about Mr. Lanes at school, how he lived alone in a rundown shack, how the other kids dared each other to ride their bikes past his property, how sometimes strange noises came from inside his house late at night. "He's always been a mean one," Thomas continued, more to himself than to Lily. "But this is something else." The dog whimpered as Thomas touched its side, checking for broken ribs or other injuries. Its eyes never left Lily's face. "Can we help him?" Lily asked, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the gentle rustle of the field grass. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Lily Pad. This dog belongs to someone else. Even if that someone is treating it badly, we can't just take it." Lily's lower lip trembled. A single tear slid down her cheek, leaving a clean trail on her dust-smudged face. "Please, Daddy." Those two words Thomas hadn't heard in so long, broke something inside him. How long had it been since Lily had called him Daddy instead of just Dad? How long since she'd said please with such raw emotion? "If we take him, we could get in trouble," Thomas warned, but he was already examining the harness for a way to release the dog. "And he might be hurt worse than we can see. He needs a vet, not just our help." Lily placed her small hand on the dog's head, her touch feather light. To Thomas's surprise, the dog didn't flinch or growl. Instead, it closed its eyes briefly, as if savoring the gentle contact. "Jack," Lily said suddenly. "What?" "His name is Jack." Thomas didn't ask how she knew this. The dog's tag clearly said nothing about a name, only ownership, but something in the way Lily said it, with such certainty, made him pause. "All right then, Jack it is." Thomas finally located the mechanism that kept the harness attached to the cart. With a few twists of his hands, he managed to free the dog from its burden. "We'll take him home, clean him up, see how bad he's hurt. But Lily, we can't keep him. We'll have to figure out what to do tomorrow." Lily nodded, but Thomas knew that look in her eyes. She had already decided that Jack belonged with them now, and God help anyone, including Victor Lanes, who tried to take him away. Thomas gently scooped the injured German Shepherd into his arms. The dog was lighter than he expected, painfully so. Clearly, whoever owned this animal hadn't been feeding it properly. "The cart," Lily pointed to the abandoned heap of metal. "Leave it," Thomas said firmly. "Let Lanes come looking for it if he wants it so badly." The walk back to their house seemed longer, with the added weight in Thomas's arms. Jack remained completely still, his breathing shallow but steady against Thomas's chest. Lily walked beside them, her small hand resting on the dog's matted fur, her face set in a determination Thomas hadn't seen since before her mother left. Their neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks, was watering her roses as they passed. Her eyes widened at the sight of them. "Thomas Morgan, what on earth do you have there?" "A dog that needs help, Barbara," Thomas replied, not slowing his pace. "Call Doc Wilson for me, would you? Tell him we need him to make a house call." Mrs. Hendricks nodded, already reaching for her phone. "Is that Victor Lanes's dog, the one he's been using to haul his junk?" "Not anymore, it's not," Thomas muttered, too quietly for her to hear. Inside their home, Thomas gently laid Jack on the old quilt that covered their living room sofa. The dog whimpered once but made no move to get up or run away. "Get me some water and that first aid kit from under the bathroom sink," Thomas instructed Lily, who darted off immediately, her bare feet pattering against the wooden floors. While she was gone, Thomas examined Jack more thoroughly. The injuries were worse than he'd initially thought. Beyond the obvious wounds from the harness and chain, the dog's paws were raw and bleeding. One leg seemed to bend at a slightly wrong angle, an old break that had healed improperly. Patches of fur were missing entirely, revealing skin that was irritated and infected. "What kind of monster would do this to you, boy?" Thomas whispered, gently stroking the dog's head. Lily returned with the supplies, her small face solemn as she placed them beside her father. She stood watching as Thomas began to clean the worst of the wounds, her fingers twisting anxiously in the fabric of her dress. "He'll be okay," Thomas assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure of that himself. "Doc Wilson will be here soon." Lily nodded, then did something unexpected. She climbed onto the sofa beside Jack, careful not to disturb Thomas's work or hurt the dog further. Then, with a gentleness that made Thomas's heart ache, she began to hum a soft lullaby, the same one Thomas used to sing to her when she had nightmares after her mother left. Jack's ears twitched at the sound. His eyes, previously half closed with pain and exhaustion, opened fully to look at Lily. There was something in that gaze, something Thomas couldn't quite identify. Recognition, trust, whatever it was, it sent a shiver down his spine. A knock at the door announced Doc Wilson's arrival. The elderly veterinarian had been treating the town's animals for more than 40 years, his hands still steady despite his advancing age. "Where's the patient?" he asked without preamble, medical bag clutched in his gnarled hand. Thomas led him to the living room, where Lily was still humming softly to Jack. The girl didn't look up as they entered, her focus entirely on the injured animal beside her. Doc Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose as he took in the scene. "Victor Lane's dog, isn't it? I've told that man 100 times that harness was barbaric." "You've seen this dog before?" Thomas asked, surprised. "Seen him? I've reported him to animal control twice. But you know how it is out here. Unless someone catches Lanes in the act, there's not much they can do." The old vet set down his bag and approached the sofa. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." Lily finally looked up, her eyes meeting Doc Wilson's. Something passed between them, an understanding, a shared purpose. "You found him, did you?" Doc Wilson asked her gently. Lily nodded. "She hasn't spoken more than 2 words at a time in over a year," Thomas explained quietly. "Not since her mother—" "I understand," Doc Wilson said, his voice kind. "Sometimes the ones who talk the least have the most to say." He turned his attention back to Jack. "Now then, let's get you fixed up, shall we?" What followed was an hour of careful examination, cleaning, bandaging, and injections. Throughout it all, Jack remained surprisingly calm, his eyes either closed in exhaustion or fixed on Lily's face. Only once did he growl, when Doc Wilson touched a particularly painful spot on his back, but a gentle touch from Lily's hand immediately quieted him. "It's remarkable," Doc Wilson commented as he packed up his supplies. "That dog should be snapping at anything that moves, considering what he's been through. Yet, he's letting a child touch him without any sign of aggression." Thomas nodded, watching as Lily continued to stroke Jack's head, her small fingers moving with a tenderness that made his throat tighten. She called him Jack. The tag just says he's Lanes' property. "Jack, is it?" Doc Wilson smiled slightly. "Well, Jack's going to need a lot of rest, good food, and those antibiotics I left. The leg was broken and never set properly. Nothing we can do about that now except manage his pain. The wounds from that blasted harness should heal if kept clean." "And then what?" Thomas asked, lowering his voice so Lily wouldn't hear. "We can't keep him. Lanes will come looking eventually." Doc Wilson's expression hardened. "You let me worry about Victor Lanes. That man's had too many warnings about how he treats his animals. This might finally be enough to get the authorities to take action." After the vet left, Lily refused to leave Jack's side. She sat on the floor beside the sofa, one hand always in contact with the dog, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. "Hungry?" Thomas asked as dinner time approached. Lily shook her head. "You need to eat something, Lilypad, and so does Jack." Thomas went to the kitchen and returned with a bowl of water and some leftover chicken, cut into small pieces. "Doc Wilson said to start with just a little food. His stomach isn't used to regular meals." Jack's nose twitched as Thomas set the bowl down, but he made no move toward the food. He seemed too weak, too defeated to even try. Lily picked up a small piece of chicken and held it near Jack's mouth. "Eat," she whispered, her voice so low Thomas barely heard it. "Please, eat." To Thomas's surprise, Jack's tongue darted out, taking the morsel from Lily's fingers. She smiled, a real full smile that Thomas hadn't seen in years, and offered another piece. Thomas watched in amazement as his daughter, who had been locked in her own world of silence for so long, spoke soft encouragements to the dog. One-word sentences mostly: good, more, drink, but each one was a miracle to Thomas's ears. As night fell, Thomas tried to convince Lily to go to bed. "Jack will be right here in the morning," he promised. "You need your rest." But Lily was adamant. She shook her head firmly, her small jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Thomas painfully of her mother. "I'll bring your blanket down then," he conceded with a sigh. "You can sleep on the love seat." When he returned with Lily's favorite quilt, a patchwork of fabrics her grandmother had made before she passed, he found his daughter had already fallen asleep. But not on the love seat. She had somehow managed to squeeze herself onto the edge of the sofa beside Jack, her small body curled protectively around the dog's head, one arm draped over his neck. Thomas stood frozen, the blanket clutched in his hands, as he listened to the soft, synchronized breathing of child and dog. In sleep, Lily's face had lost the wary guardedness it usually carried. She looked peaceful. She looked like his little girl again. He gently draped the blanket over them both and turned to leave. As he reached the doorway, a soft voice stopped him. "He showed me," Lily murmured, her eyes still closed. Thomas turned back. "Showed you what, sweetheart?" "A baby," Lily whispered, already drifting back to sleep. "In the dark, crying." A chill ran down Thomas's spine as he watched his daughter slip back into slumber, her fingers tangled in Jack's fur. What did she mean? What baby? But Lily offered no further explanation, and Thomas was left standing in the doorway, unsettled by her words and the strange bond that had formed so quickly between his silent daughter and this broken dog. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a car door slammed. Thomas had the uneasy feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Morning light filtered through the living room curtains, casting golden stripes across Jack's still form. Thomas, who had barely slept, checked on them multiple times throughout the night. Each time, he found the same scene: Lily curled protectively around Jack, both breathing in perfect rhythm. Thomas made coffee and leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the abandoned cart still visible in the distance. The sight of it made his blood boil all over again. Who treats an animal like that? And what was that cryptic thing Lily had said about a baby? A soft patting of feet made him turn. Lily stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes more alert than he'd seen them in months. "He's awake," she said simply. Thomas followed her back to the living room. Jack's eyes were indeed open, watching their approach with cautious awareness. When he saw Lily, his tail gave a weak thump against the sofa cushion. "Morning, buddy," Thomas said gently, kneeling beside the dog. "How are you feeling today?" Jack's eyes shifted to him, intelligent and assessing, before returning to Lily. The connection between them was almost tangible, a thread of understanding that Thomas couldn't quite grasp. "He needs food," Lily stated, her voice stronger than yesterday. Thomas nodded, surprised and pleased by her clear speech. "Let's get him some breakfast then. And you too, young lady." After a simple meal, scrambled eggs for Lily, more chicken broth with rice for Jack, Thomas examined the dog's wounds. They looked slightly better in the daylight, though still serious. The antibiotics Doc Wilson had left would help with infection, but Jack had a long road to recovery ahead. "I need to make some calls," Thomas told Lily, who had resumed her position beside Jack on the sofa. "See what we can do about Mr. Lanes." Lily's face darkened at the mention of the name, and Jack's ears flattened against his head. And Thomas retreated to the kitchen and dialed the county sheriff's office. After explaining the situation, he was passed to Sheriff Cooper, a stern man with a reputation for fairness. "You say you took Victor Lanes's dog?" The sheriff's voice crackled through the speaker, a note of warning in his tone. "I say I rescued an animal that was being cruelly abused," Thomas corrected, keeping his voice low so Lily wouldn't overhear. "Doc Wilson has already been out to treat him. He says the injuries are extensive and consistent with long-term mistreatment." Sheriff Cooper sighed heavily. "Look, Thomas, I understand where you're coming from, but you can't just take someone's property, even if you think they're mistreating it." "Property?" Thomas's grip on the phone tightened. This is a living creature, not a lawnmower. In the eyes of the law, animals are considered— I know what the law says, Thomas interrupted. But you haven't seen this dog, Sheriff. The harness had cut into his skin. His paws were bleeding from pulling that cart. He can barely walk. Another sigh. Doc Wilson mentioned he was planning to file a report. If he does, and if the evidence supports it, we can look into charges of animal cruelty. But until then what? I just hand Jack back to the man who nearly killed him? Jack? Thomas winced, realizing his mistake. That's what my daughter calls him. She's gotten attached. Your daughter? The sheriff's tone softened slightly. The quiet one? Marion's girl? Yes, Thomas admitted. She's speaking again, Sheriff. Full sentences sometimes. Ever since we found Jack. A long pause followed. Sheriff Cooper had known Thomas's family for years. He'd been there the day Marion walked out, leaving Thomas with a shell-shocked 3-year-old who'd gradually stopped talking altogether. Give me a couple of days, the sheriff finally said. Keep the dog for now. I'll pay Lanes a visit, see what I can find out. But, Thomas, if there's not enough evidence— I understand. But he didn't, not really. How could he ever return Jack to a man who had treated him so cruelly? As Thomas hung up, a loud knock at the front door made him jump. Through the kitchen window, he could see a battered pickup truck parked haphazardly in his driveway, a truck he recognized immediately. Lily, take Jack to your room, he said urgently, striding into the living room. Quick, now. Lily looked alarmed, but didn't question him. With surprising strength for her small size, she helped Jack up from the sofa. The dog wobbled on his feet, but managed to follow her toward the stairs, his bandaged paws moving slowly across the wooden floor. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Coming, Thomas called, waiting until Lily and Jack disappeared upstairs before opening the door. Victor Lane stood on his porch, a stocky man in his 60s, with a face weathered by sun and alcohol, his gray beard stained yellow around the mouth. The smell of stale cigarettes and whiskey emanated from him like a cloud. "Where's my dog, Morgan?" he demanded without preamble, his bloodshot eyes narrowed to slits. Thomas blocked the doorway, his body tense. "Good morning to you too, Victor. Don't play games with me. Barbara Hendricks said she saw you carrying my dog yesterday. That's theft, plain and simple." "Is it theft to help an animal that's been abused to the point of collapse?" Thomas countered, fighting to keep his voice level. "Jack was half dead when we found him." Lanes's face darkened. "Jack, his name ain't Jack, and he's my property. I use him for work." "You use him for slave labor," Thomas shot back. "He's malnourished, injured, and traumatized. Doc Wilson's already examined him and is filing a report with the sheriff." "Wilson?" Lane spat to the side, narrowly missing Thomas's boot. "That old fool's been after me for years. Thinks he knows better than everybody else how to treat animals." "In this case, he does." Lanes took a step closer, his fists clenching at his sides. Thomas stood his ground, though every instinct told him to slam the door in the man's face. "I want my dog back. Now." Each word was punctuated with the smell of stale alcohol. "No." Thomas matched the older man's glare. "The sheriff's investigating. If he decides you haven't broken any laws, then we can talk. Until then, the dog stays here." Lanes's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? You and that mute brat of yours." Thomas's restraint snapped. He grabbed Lanes by the collar, shoving him back a step. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter." Lanes laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Hit a nerve, did I? Well, you hit one too. That dog is mine, and I'm not leaving without him." A movement at the top of the stairs caught Thomas's eye. Lily stood there, her small face pale but determined, watching the confrontation below. "Go back to your room, Lily," Thomas called, not releasing his grip on Lanes's shirt. Lanes followed his gaze, his eyes narrowing when he spotted the little girl. "There you are. Where's my dog, girl?" Lily didn't answer, but her chin raised slightly in defiance. "I said get out," Thomas growled, giving Lanes another shove toward the door. "Before I forget my manners entirely." "This isn't over," Lanes warned, finally backing away. "Not by a long shot. That dog is mine, and I'll get him back, one way or another." He stomped back to his truck, the engine roaring to life with a belch of black smoke. As he backed out of the driveway, he rolled down his window and shouted, "You tell your kid to mind her own business. Some things ain't meant for little eyes." Thomas watched until the truck disappeared down the road, confusion mixing with his anger. What did Lanes mean by that? What wasn't meant for little eyes? Lily had already disappeared back upstairs by the time Thomas closed and locked the door. He found her in her bedroom, sitting on the floor beside Jack. The dog was lying on her pink rug, his head resting in her lap. "It's okay," Thomas assured her, kneeling beside them. "He's gone now." Lily's fingers twisted nervously in Jack's fur. "He's a bad man," she whispered. Thomas couldn't argue with that assessment. "Yes, he is, but don't worry, we're not going to let him take Jack." Lily looked up at him, her green eyes suddenly too old for her 5-year-old face. He hurt the baby too. That chill returned to Thomas's spine. "What baby, Lily? What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, Lily reached for the pad of paper and crayons she kept on her bedside table. With intense concentration, she began to draw, her small fingers gripping the blue crayon tightly. Thomas watched as a crude barn took shape on the page. Inside, 2 figures emerged, one clearly a dog, the other small and huddled in a corner, a baby. "Jack showed me," Lily said, adding a thick black chain connecting the 2 figures. "In my dreams." "Showed you in your dreams?" Thomas stared at the drawing, unease spreading through him. "Lily, honey, it was just a dream. Dogs can't show us things." Lily shook her head firmly. "Not a dream, a memory. Jack's memory." Thomas didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never been a superstitious man, never believed in the kind of psychic connections that the older folks in town sometimes whispered about. But the certainty in Lily's voice was unnerving. "The baby cries a lot," Lily continued, adding dark scribbles around the barn. "No one comes except Jack. He tries to keep it warm." Thomas gently took the drawing from her, studying it more closely. The crude lines and childish proportions couldn't disguise the disturbing nature of what was depicted. A chained dog and a seemingly abandoned infant in some dark place. "Lily," he said carefully, "did you ever hear about a missing baby? Maybe at school or from Mrs. Hendricks?" Lily shook her head. "Jack showed me," she repeated stubbornly. Thomas glanced at the German shepherd, who was watching them both with those intelligent eyes. An impossible thought struck him, a rumor he had heard years ago, never confirmed, about Victor Lane's estranged daughter who had come to stay with him briefly, heavily pregnant and clearly in trouble. She'd left a few months later, no longer pregnant but with no baby in tow. The town had whispered, but no one had proof of anything, and the girl had never returned. "When did you see this, Lily? When did Jack show you?" "Last night," she answered simply. "And again this morning. The baby is cold and hungry. We need to help." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, torn between dismissing this as a child's imagination and the disturbing specificity of Lily's claims. Jack whined softly, as if urging him to listen. "We need to talk to Sheriff Cooper," Thomas finally decided. "Tell him what Jack has shown you." Lily nodded solemnly, returning to her drawing. This time she added another figure, a small girl with yellow hair, clearly meant to be herself, standing between the dog and the baby. "I'll protect them both," she declared, her voice stronger than Thomas had heard in years. The phone rang, startling them all. Thomas hurried back downstairs to answer it. "Thomas, it's Doc Wilson." The vet's voice was tight with urgency. "Is the dog still with you?" "Yes, he's upstairs with Lily. Why?" "Keep him there. Keep him safe. I just ran into Victor Lanes at the feed store, ranting about getting his property back." Thomas sighed. "Yeah, he already came by here. I sent him packing." "Did he say anything unusual about why he wants the dog back so badly?" Thomas froze, Lily's drawing flashing in his mind. He said something about Lily minding her own business, that some things weren't meant for little eyes. Why? A long pause followed. "Thomas, you remember the rumors about Lanes' daughter a few years back, the pregnant one?" "I was just thinking about that," Thomas admitted, lowering his voice. "Lily's been saying strange things, drawing pictures of a baby locked up somewhere with Jack. She says the dog showed her in her dreams." "God almighty," Doc Wilson breathed. "Thomas, when I was treating Jack yesterday, I noticed something odd. His canine teeth have been filed down. It's something sometimes done to dogs who are used as caretakers for other animals, or in some awful cases, for people," Thomas finished, his blood running cold. "You think Lanes might actually have a child hidden somewhere?" "I don't know," the vet answered honestly, "but I'm thinking we should take Lily's dreams seriously. very seriously indeed. Thomas agreed, promising to call the sheriff immediately. As he hung up, a small cold hand slipped into his. Lily stood beside him, a new drawing clutched in her other hand. "Jack needs to go back," she said softly. "What?" "Lily, no, we can't send him back to that man." "Not forever," Lily clarified, her eyes solemn. "Just to show us where the baby is." She held up her drawing. It showed Jack leading Lily and Thomas to a small structure hidden among trees, the barn from her earlier picture. Thomas felt a cold certainty settle over him. His logical mind rebelled against it, but something deeper, a father's instinct perhaps, told him to trust his daughter's strange connection with this broken, gentle dog. "Let me call Sheriff Cooper first," he said. "We can't do this alone, Lily." She nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on Jack, who had limped down the stairs after her. The dog met her gaze steadily, as if confirming some private understanding between them. Thomas watched them, wondering what invisible thread connected his silent daughter to this suffering animal, and what awful secrets they might uncover if they followed where it led. An hour later, Sheriff Cooper's patrol car pulled into the driveway. Thomas had explained everything. Lily's drawings, her cryptic statements, Doc Wilson's observations about Jack's teeth. The sheriff had listened in silence, his weathered face giving nothing away. Now, as Cooper examined Lily's drawings spread out on the kitchen table, his expression turned grave. "You know how this sounds?" he said quietly to Thomas. "Crazy," Thomas admitted. "I know, but there's something here, Sheriff. Something not right." The sheriff nodded slowly. "There has been talk about Lanes for years. Nothing concrete enough to get a warrant, but—" He trailed off, looking at Lily, who sat stroking Jack's head. "Your daughter started talking again because of this dog?" "More words in the last 24 hours than in the last 2 years, Thomas confirmed. Cooper crouched down to Lily's level. "Lily, these pictures you drew, you say Jack showed you these things in your dreams?" Lily nodded solemnly. "And there's a baby somewhere, in a barn?" "In the dark," Lily specified. "Cold, crying. Jack keeps it warm." Cooper's eyes met Thomas's over Lily's head. Something unspoken passed between the men, the disturbing possibility that a child might actually be in danger. "I'm going to need to take another look at Lanes's property," Cooper decided, standing up. "But I still don't have enough for a warrant to search thoroughly." "So, what do we do?" Thomas asked. Cooper hesitated, clearly torn between following protocol and following his instincts. "Officially, I'm going to pay Mr. Lanes a visit, ask about his dog, and keep my eyes open for anything suspicious. Unofficially," he looked down at Jack, who stared back with those knowing eyes. "I think your daughter might be onto something, and I think this dog might be the key to figuring out what." Before Thomas could respond, a muffled cry came from outside. All three of them turned toward the window, in time to see Victor Lanes's truck speeding down the road past their house, a cloud of dust in its wake. He was watching us, Thomas realized aloud, this whole time. Sheriff Cooper was already moving toward the door, his hand on his service weapon. "Stay here. Lock the doors. I'm going to follow him." But Lily stood up suddenly, her voice ringing out with startling clarity. "No! He's going to hurt the baby! We have to go now!" Jack barked once, sharp and urgent, as if confirming her words. Cooper hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Thomas, I can't take a civilian, let alone a child, on a potential criminal investigation." "Then go," Thomas urged. "Follow him. We'll stay here." The sheriff nodded and hurried out. The sound of his patrol car starting up and pulling away filled the sudden silence of the kitchen. Lily turned to her father, her small face set with a determination that startled him. "He won't find it," she said with absolute certainty. "Only Jack knows where." Thomas looked from his daughter to the injured dog, who was now standing despite his bandaged paws, watching the door with obvious agitation. "Lily, we can't just—" "Please, Daddy," she interrupted, her voice breaking on the word. "The baby is scared. Jack knows. I know." Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything logical, everything sensible, told him to stay put, to let the sheriff handle this. But the look in his daughter's eyes, and in the dog's, spoke of an urgency he couldn't ignore. "If we do this," he said slowly, "you follow my instructions exactly. We stay together, and at the first sign of trouble, we leave and call for help. Promise me, Lily." She nodded solemnly. "Promise." Thomas grabbed his truck keys and phone. "Let's go then." Getting Jack into the truck proved challenging. The dog winced with every step, his bandaged paws clearly still painful. Thomas ended up carrying him, surprised again at how light the German Shepherd was, a testament to Lane's neglect. Lily climbed into the back seat, and Thomas carefully placed Jack beside her. The dog immediately shifted position until his head rested in Lily's lap, those intelligent eyes fixed on her face. "Which way?" Thomas asked as he started the engine. Lily looked at Jack, a silent communication passing between them. Then she pointed toward the old logging road that led deeper into the woods beyond their property. "That way," she said with quiet certainty, "past the creek, then left at the big dead tree." Thomas didn't ask how she knew this. Something about the conviction in her voice silenced his doubts. He drove slowly, mindful of the ruts and holes in the rarely used road. The forest grew thicker around them, pine and oak, creating a canopy that dimmed the midday light. Thomas had lived in this area his whole life, but rarely ventured this deep into the woods, especially not in this direction, toward Lane's remote property. "Slow," Lily instructed, as they approached a rusted metal bridge spanning a narrow creek. "Stop after the bridge. We walk from here." Again, Thomas complied without questioning. He parked the truck just beyond the bridge and turned to face his daughter. "Lily, are you sure about this? Jack is hurt. You're only 5. Maybe we should wait for Sheriff Cooper." Lily shook her head firmly. "The baby is crying. Jack can hear it." As if on cue, Jack raised his head, ears perked forward, a low whine building in his throat. Thomas weighed his options. His parental instincts screamed at him not to drag his child further into what could be a dangerous situation. But those same instincts couldn't ignore the possibility that another child, an infant, might be in trouble. "We'll go a little farther," he decided. "But at the first sign of danger, we're turning back. And you stay right beside me the whole time. No running ahead." Lily nodded solemnly. They climbed out of the truck, Thomas once again carrying Jack despite the dog's obvious desire to walk on his own. The forest was quiet around them. Too quiet, Thomas thought. No bird song, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. "This way," Lily pointed toward a barely visible path leading away from the road. It was little more than a game trail, winding between dense undergrowth and fallen logs. Thomas followed, mindful of tree roots and thorny vines that could trip his small daughter. Jack grew increasingly restless in his arms, twisting to look ahead, that whine growing more urgent. After about 10 minutes of careful hiking, the path widened slightly. Through the trees, Thomas could make out a small, dilapidated structure. Not the barn Lily had drawn, but a hunter's cabin, its wooden walls gray with age, roof sagging in the middle. "That's it?" he whispered to Lily. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Thomas set Jack down carefully, keeping a firm hand on his collar to prevent him from running ahead. "Stay close," he reminded them both. They approached the cabin slowly. No smoke rose from the rusty chimney pipe. No sound came from within. The small dirt yard was bare except for an ancient woodpile and a stump serving as a chopping block. Thomas felt his heart pounding as they neared the weathered door. Should he knock? Call out? What if Lane's was inside? He put a protective hand on Lily's shoulder, easing her behind him. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing strangely in the forest stillness. "Anyone here?" No response. Jack strained against Thomas's grip on his collar, his entire body quivering with urgency. Thomas tried the door, locked. He peered through a grimy window, but could see little through the dirt-encrusted glass. "Around back," Lily whispered, tugging his sleeve. They circled the small cabin. The rear had a second door, this one hanging slightly ajar. Thomas's unease deepened. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, like walking into a trap. "Stay here," he instructed Lily, releasing Jack's collar to free his hands. "Both of you." But the moment he let go, Jack bolted forward, pushing through the half-open door despite his injuries. His sudden movement startled Thomas so much that he didn't react quickly enough to grab him. "Jack!" Lily cried, starting after him. Thomas caught her arm just in time. "No, Lily. Stay here." The sound of barking came from inside the cabin. Not aggressive barking, but the high-pitched, excited sound of a dog that's found something important. Thomas pushed the door open wider, his every sense on high alert. "Hello?" he called again, stepping carefully over the threshold. The cabin's interior was dim, the only light filtering through the dirty windows and the open door. It smelled of mildew and something else, something sour and unpleasant. The main room contained little: a rusty wood stove, a rickety table with one chair, some shelves with canned goods. Jack wasn't there. Instead, he had disappeared through another doorway that led to what Thomas assumed was a back room. "Jack," Thomas called softly, moving toward the doorway. The dog's whining grew louder, more insistent. Drawing a deep breath, Thomas stepped through the inner doorway and froze. Jack stood beside a crude wooden cradle, his nose gently nudging the bundle of blankets inside. His bandaged paws had left bloody prints on the rough wooden floor. Thomas approached slowly, his heart in his throat. The bundle moved slightly, and a weak cry emerged, the unmistakable sound of an infant. "Oh my God," he breathed, rushing forward. The baby was tiny, perhaps only a few months old, its face red and pinched with hunger, eyes swollen from crying. The blankets were soiled and damp, and the child's skin felt cool to Thomas's touch. Too cool. Jack looked up at Thomas, those expressive eyes seeming to say, "I told you so." Then he lowered his head to nuzzle the infant again, his body heat warming the child. "Daddy?" Lily's small voice came from the outer room. "Can I come in now?" "No, Lily," Thomas called back, his mind racing. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming to you." He carefully lifted the baby from the cradle, wrapping the small form more securely in the cleaner portions of the blanket. The infant weighed almost nothing, a fragile bundle of bones and translucent skin. How long had this child been here? Hours? Days? And where was Lane's? Thomas hurried back to Lily, the baby cradled against his chest, Jack limping at his heels. "It's really real," Lily whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at the infant. "Jack's baby." "We need to get this child to a hospital," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the panic rising within him. "And we need to call Sheriff Cooper." They exited the cabin as quickly as possible, Thomas clutching the whimpering infant with one arm while keeping his other hand firmly on Lily's shoulder. Jack followed, his movements slow but determined, never taking his eyes off the baby. The hike back to the truck seemed to take forever, every shadow in the woods appearing menacing, every snapping twig sounding like a gunshot. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, they reached the vehicle. Thomas handed the baby carefully to Lily while he opened the door, then took the infant back and placed the child securely in her lap. "Hold the baby just like this," he instructed, demonstrating how to support the tiny head. "I'm going to carry Jack." As he turned to lift the injured dog, a voice froze him in place. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Victor Lane stepped out from behind a large oak tree, a hunting rifle cradled in his arms. His bloodshot eyes darted from Thomas to Lily, then to the bundle in her arms. "That don't belong to you," he said, gesturing with the rifle barrel toward the baby. "None of it belongs to you." Thomas moved instinctively to place himself between Lane's and his daughter. "This baby needs a hospital, Victor. It's half-starved, half-frozen." "She's fine," Lane's growled. "Was fine till you stuck your nose where it don't belong." She, a little girl. Thomas's anger flared despite his fear. "Fine? She's dying. What kind of monster leaves an infant alone in a cabin in the woods?" "She wasn't alone," Lane's countered, his voice defensive. "The dog was with her." "A dog isn't a babysitter." "He does fine," Laney's insisted, his gaze sliding to Jack, who stood stiffly beside the truck, hackles raised despite his weakened condition. "Been taking care of her since she was born." "Where's her mother?" Thomas demanded. Something flashed across Lane's weathered face. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. Gone. Left her behind, just like she left everything else behind. My own daughter couldn't even stick around long enough to raise her kid. The rumors had been true then. Lane's daughter had been pregnant, had given birth, and then abandoned her child with her father, a man clearly unequipped to care for an infant. "So, you just locked her in a cabin with a dog?" Thomas couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. "I check on her," Lane's protested, the rifle wavering slightly in his unsteady hands. "Bring food, clean things up. The dog watches her the rest of the time, keeps her warm, keeps her safe. Been doing it for 3 months now without no trouble." "3 months?" Thomas was horrified. "She looks half dead, Victor." "She's just small," Lane's insisted, but doubt crept into his voice. "Like her mama was." Thomas saw his opening. "She needs a doctor, Victor. Professional care, proper food, and warmth. You must see that." Lane's eyes darted uncertainly to the bundle in Lily's arms. The baby had gone quiet. Too quiet. "Let us take her to the hospital," Thomas pressed gently. "You can come too. Explain the situation. I'm sure if you tell them about your daughter leaving, how you were doing your best." He let the implication hang in the air, though he doubted any court would be lenient with a man who'd left an infant in the care of an abused dog. Lanes seemed to be wavering, the rifle lowering slightly. Then the wail of a siren cut through the forest stillness, distant but approaching rapidly. "You called the cops," Laney snarled, raising the rifle again. "You lying bastard!" "I didn't," Thomas protested, hands raised placatingly. "Sheriff Cooper was already following you, remember?" But Lanes wasn't listening. His face had contorted with rage and fear. "Give me back my granddaughter," he shouted, taking a step forward. Jack moved faster than Thomas would have thought possible for an injured dog. He lunged forward, not attacking, but placing himself directly between Lanes and the truck where Lily clutched the infant. Lanes swung the rifle toward the dog. "Get out of the way, you mangy." Thomas didn't think. He just reacted. Throwing himself forward, he tackled Lanes just as the rifle discharged. The sound was deafening in the forest quiet, birds exploding from nearby trees in panic. The two men crashed to the ground, Thomas's larger frame momentarily pinning Lanes beneath him. They struggled for control of the rifle, rolling in the dirt and leaves. "Daddy!" Lily's terrified voice cut through the chaos. "Stay in the truck!" Thomas yelled, grunting as Lanes's elbow connected with his ribs. Despite his age, Lanes fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The rifle discharged again, the bullet punching through the truck's front tire with a loud hiss. Suddenly, another vehicle skidded to a halt nearby, Sheriff Cooper's patrol car. The lawman leapt out, weapon drawn. "Freeze," he commanded. "Put the weapon down." Lanes ignored him, still wrestling with Thomas for control of the rifle. Another shot went wild, splintering bark from a nearby tree. Cooper advanced cautiously, unable to get a clear shot with the two men tangled together. Then Jack, despite his injuries, despite the gunfire that clearly terrified him, flung himself into the fray. His teeth, filed down as they were, couldn't do much damage, but his weight and momentum were enough to knock Lanes off balance. The rifle went flying, landing several feet away. Thomas scrambled to his feet just as Cooper reached them, the sheriff quickly subduing Lanes with a knee to the back and handcuffs. "You okay?" Cooper asked, glancing up at Thomas. Thomas nodded, breathing hard. "The baby? There's a baby in the truck with Lily. Needs medical attention right away." Cooper's eyes widened, but his professional training held. He finished securing Lanes before speaking into his radio, calling for an ambulance and backup. Thomas hurried back to the truck, heart hammering. Lily sat exactly where he'd left her, tears streaming down her face. The infant still clutched protectively in her arms. Jack had limped back to them, his bloody paws leaving a trail on the forest floor. "It's okay now," Thomas assured them, opening the door to check on the baby. "You're safe. You're all safe." The infant's breathing was shallow, her skin still too cool, but she was alive. Relief washed over Thomas like a wave. "Jack knew," Lily whispered, looking down at the dog who'd placed his head on the seat beside her. "He always knew where she was." Thomas nodded, unable to argue with the evidence before him. Somehow, through some connection he couldn't begin to understand, Jack had led them to this abandoned child, had been trying to lead someone to her all along. "You're a hero, boy," he told the dog, gently stroking his matted fur. "Both of you are heroes." Sheriff Cooper approached, Lanes now secured in the back of his patrol car. "Ambulance is on its way," he said. "Want to tell me what the hell is going on here?" Thomas explained everything. Lily's drawings, Jack's strange behavior, the cabin, and finally, the baby they'd discovered. Cooper listened in stunned silence. "So, the dog was actually babysitting?" he asked incredulously. "In a manner of speaking," Thomas replied. "Lanes admits he left them alone for long periods. I think Jack was doing his best to keep the baby alive." They both looked at the German Shepherd, who hadn't left Lily's side despite his own obvious pain and exhaustion. "Never seen anything like it," Cooper admitted. "That dog should hate humans after what Lanes did to him. Instead, he risks his life to save a baby." In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Help was coming. Thomas reached out to stroke Jack's head. "He doesn't hate people," he said softly. "He just needed to find the right ones." The next few hours passed in a blur. Paramedics arrived, immediately taking charge of the infant. A little girl indeed, severely malnourished and suffering from hypothermia, but miraculously still alive. They whisked her away to the nearest hospital, lights flashing and sirens blaring. Thomas followed in his truck, one tire now flat from Lanes's wild shot, the vehicle limping along slowly. Cooper had offered to take Lily and Jack in his patrol car, leaving a deputy to guard lanes until transport arrived to take him to the county jail. At the hospital, chaos ensued. Doctors and nurses swarmed around the tiny infant, medical terms flying too fast for Thomas to follow. Lily sat quietly in the waiting room, Jack's head in her lap, both of them exhausted, but refusing to be separated. A kind nurse had examined Jack's paws, cleaning and rebandaging them properly. "He's quite a dog," she'd remarked, giving him a gentle pat. "He saved that baby's life," Thomas told her. Somehow, he knew she needed help. Hours later, a tired-looking doctor approached them. "Mr. Morgan, Sheriff Cooper said you were the one who found the infant." Thomas nodded, standing up. "How is she?" "Stable for now. She's severely undernourished and dehydrated. We're treating her for exposure and the beginnings of pneumonia, but children, especially infants, are remarkably resilient. With proper care, she should recover." Relief washed over Thomas. Thank God. The sheriff mentioned something about a dog being involved. The doctor's tone was skeptical. Thomas gestured to Jack, who watched them both with those intelligent eyes. "This is Jack. He led us to the baby. He's been looking after her, I guess you could say." The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. "Child Protective Services has been notified. They'll want to speak with you about exactly how you found the child." Thomas nodded. "Of course." After the doctor left, Thomas sat back down beside Lily, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "The baby's going to be okay," he told her gently, "thanks to you and Jack." Lily nodded solemnly, her small hand still resting on Jack's head. "What will happen to her now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas hesitated. "Well, CPS will find her a good home, a family who can take care of her properly." "And Jack? What about Jack?" That was the question Thomas had been avoiding. With Lanes arrested and likely facing serious charges, Jack no longer had a legal owner, abusive as that owner had been. "I guess Jack will need a home too," Thomas said carefully. Lily's eyes met his, a plea in their depths that needed no words. Thomas sighed, a smile tugging at his lips despite his exhaustion. "I suppose we do have that big backyard." Lily's face lit up with the first real smile he'd seen in years. Sheriff Cooper found them there an hour later, Lily dozing against Thomas's side, Jack still awake and alert at their feet. "Quite a day," Cooper remarked, settling into the chair opposite them. Thomas nodded wearily. "Any word on Lanes?" "He's singing like a canary now, trying to save his own skin. Claims his daughter left the baby with him about 3 months ago, said she'd be back in a week, never returned. He didn't report it because he has outstanding warrants in the next county over." "So he just kept her in that cabin?" Cooper nodded grimly. "Says he'd check on her once a day, sometimes skip a day if the weather was bad. Left the dog there to babysit." The sheriff shook his head in disgust, filed that poor animal's teeth down so it couldn't hurt the child, then chained them both up together. Thomas looked down at Jack, seeing the dog's ordeal in a new light. Not just an abused animal, but one forced to bear a terrible responsibility, keeping an infant alive with almost no resources. "You're going to need to make a statement," Cooper continued, "and we'll want to talk to Lily too, if that's okay. Though, from what I've seen, the case against Lanes is pretty solid even without her testimony." Thomas nodded, absent-mindedly stroking Jack's head. "And the baby? Do they know who her mother is?" "Working on it. Lanes gave us his daughter's name, Melissa Lanes. Last known address was in Tupelo. We're trying to track her down, but who knows if she's even still there." "And if they find her?" Cooper shrugged. "Depends on her situation, I guess. Abandoning your child with an unfit caretaker is a serious offense. But if she was in some kind of trouble herself," he trailed off, leaving the possibilities unspoken. "And if they don't find her, or if she doesn't want the baby back?" "Foster care, most likely, then adoption." Thomas nodded, his mind already spinning with possibilities, thoughts he wasn't quite ready to voice aloud. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Morgan, the baby's awake if you'd like to see her." Thomas looked down at Lily, still sleeping against his side. He hated to wake her, but he knew she'd want to see the infant she and Jack had helped rescue. "Lily," he said softly, giving her shoulder a gentle shake, "would you like to see the baby?" Lily's eyes fluttered open, confusion momentarily clouding them before understanding dawned. "Yes," she whispered. "Can Jack come too?"
The nurse hesitated. "I'm not sure if—"
"It's important," Thomas interrupted. The The dog helped save her life. After a brief consultation with a doctor, permission was granted for a short visit with Jack, provided he was clean and under control. The nursery was quiet, soft lights casting a gentle glow over the row of bassinets. Only one was occupied, the tiny infant they'd rescued, now cleaned up and connected to various monitors, a feeding tube providing the nourishment her tiny body desperately needed. "She's so small," Lily whispered, standing on tiptoes to peer into the bassinet. The baby's eyes were open, dark blue, and surprisingly alert given her ordeal. When Jack approached, those eyes fixed on him with what Thomas could have sworn was recognition. Jack whined softly, his tail giving a gentle wag. He made no attempt to get closer than the nurses allowed, but his attention remained fixed on the infant, his body quivering slightly with emotion. "He missed her," Lily said with absolute certainty. He was worried. The baby made a soft cooing sound, tiny fingers flexing as if reaching for the dog. "What will happen to them both?" Lily asked, looking up at her father with those solemn green eyes. Thomas didn't have all the answers, not yet. But watching his daughter, this once silent child now full of questions and concerns, he felt something settle within him, a decision he hadn't even realized he was making. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Together." Jack looked up at him, those intelligent eyes seeming to understand far more than any dog should. Then he turned back to the baby, standing guard, just as he had done in that lonely cabin. Only now, he wasn't alone in his vigil. As they left the hospital hours later, exhaustion pulling at them all, Thomas found himself looking at his small, strange family with new eyes. His daughter, speaking again, communicating with a confidence he'd feared lost forever. Jack, limping but determined, his loyalty unshaken despite his suffering. And perhaps, Thomas hardly dared think it yet, perhaps there would soon be room for one more. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be statements to make, hearings to attend, evaluations and home studies if they pursued what Thomas was beginning to consider. But for now, in this moment, something broken had begun to heal. Not just Jack's physical wounds or Lily's emotional ones, but something deeper, something that connected them all. In the truck's rearview mirror, Thomas caught sight of Lily in the back seat, her head resting against Jack's side, both of them finally surrendering to exhaustion. He drove carefully, mindful of the precious cargo he carried, and the even more precious future that suddenly seemed possible. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The story of Jack, Lily, and the abandoned baby had spread like wildfire through their small town, then to neighboring communities, and finally to the internet at large. It started with a simple news report on the local station: abused dog leads rescuers to abandoned infant, accompanied by a hastily shot video of Jack in the hospital, standing guard over the bassinet of the baby he'd helped save. Someone shared it online, and by morning, the video had thousands of views. By the end of the first week, national news outlets had picked up the story. German Shepherd used as babysitter for abandoned infant, became heroic dog survives abuse to save baby's life, which evolved into Free Jack, a viral campaign demanding justice for the abused dog and the child he'd protected. Thomas's quiet phone began ringing constantly. Reporters wanted interviews, animal rights activists wanted updates, strangers from across the country sent messages of support, offers of help, and in some cases, adoption applications for both Jack. "It's insane," Thomas told Doc Wilson during Jack's follow-up visit at the veterinary clinic. "Yesterday, someone from California called offering to pay all of Jack's medical expenses for life." The elderly vet smiled as he checked Jack's healing paws. People are hungry for good news, for heroes, and Jack here is definitely a hero. Lily sat nearby, watching the examination with solemn attention. She hadn't left Jack's side for more than a few minutes in the past 2 weeks, and the dog showed the same devotion to her. Their bond had only strengthened through the ordeal. "How's the little one doing?" Doc Wilson asked, straightening up with a grunt as his old knees protested. "Better," Thomas replied. "Still in the hospital, but gaining weight. They're calling her Baby Jane until..." He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Until they found her mother? Until she was placed with a foster family? Until..." Doc Wilson nodded understanding. "Ann Lane's still in custody? His court date is next month. Sheriff Cooper says with the evidence they have gathered, he'll likely be facing serious time." "Good," the vet said firmly. "Animals are more perceptive than most people give them credit for. But what Jack did, Staying with that baby, keeping her alive, that goes beyond instinct. That's something special. Thomas couldn't argue with that. He'd witnessed Jack's dedication firsthand, not just to the baby, but to Lily as well. The dog who had every reason to fear and hate humans had instead devoted himself to protecting them. Jack's healing well, Doc Wilson continued. The paw pads are still tender, but with continued rest, they should be completely healed in another week or two. The nutritional supplements are helping too. He's gained 5 pounds already. And his teeth? Thomas asked quietly, mindful of Lily listening nearby. Doc Wilson shook his head. Nothing to be done about those, I'm afraid. The filing caused permanent damage, but it doesn't seem to bother him much, and he can still eat soft food without difficulty. Thomas nodded, reaching out to stroke Jack's head. The dog leaned into his touch, those expressive eyes seeming to convey gratitude and trust. We're keeping him, Lily announced suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been in years. Forever. Thomas and Doc Wilson exchanged looks over her head. There had been no formal decision yet about Jack's future, though Thomas had already begun the process of applying for legal ownership. With Lanes in jail and facing charges, the dog was technically in legal limbo. We'll see, Lilypad, Thomas said gently. There's paperwork and... He's ours now, Lily insisted, her small hand buried in Jack's fur. And we're his. Doc Wilson chuckled. I'd say that's pretty definitive, Thomas. In my experience, when a child and a dog form a bond like this, it's best not to question it. Thomas couldn't help but smile. I guess you're right. As they left the clinic, Thomas's phone rang again. An unknown number. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another reporter, but something made him answer. Mr. Morgan, this is Diane Reynolds from Child Protective Services. I'm calling about baby Jane. Thomas's heart skipped a beat. Yes? We've located the baby's mother, Melissa Lanes. She's currently in a rehabilitation facility in Memphis. Thomas tightened his grip on the phone. I see. She's confirmed that the baby is hers, but she's also made it clear that she's in no position to care for a child. She's signed initial paperwork surrendering her parental rights. Oh, Thomas wasn't sure what else to say. Part of him felt sorrow for the young woman and her struggles. Another part felt a surge of something he wasn't ready to name. The reason I'm calling, Diane continued, is that Ms. Lane specifically asked about the family who found her daughter, about you. She saw the news coverage and, well, she's requested that if possible, her baby be placed with you. Thomas stopped walking, so suddenly that Lily bumped into him. With me? But I'm not... I understand this is unexpected, Diane said, and of course there would be a formal process, home studies, background checks, all the standard procedures for foster placement with the possibility of adoption. But Ms. Lanes was quite adamant that she wanted her daughter to be with the family that dog trusted. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. I don't know what to say. You don't need to decide anything right now, Diane assured him. But I wanted to let you know that this is a possibility, if you're interested. We could begin the process as early as next week. After promising to think it over and call back, Thomas hung up, his mind reeling. Lily looked up at him questioningly. What's wrong, Daddy? Thomas crouched down to her level, still trying to process the conversation. That was someone from Child Protective Services. About the baby. Lily's eyes widened. Is she okay? Yes, she's fine. They found her mother, but she's not able to take care of a baby right now. Thomas hesitated, unsure how much to share with his 5-year-old. She asked if maybe we would want to take care of the baby for a while, maybe forever. Lily's face lit up with joy. Yes, we can be her family, us and Jack. Thomas smiled despite his uncertainty. It's not that simple, Lilypad. Taking care of a baby is a huge responsibility. I'd be a single dad with 2 kids. You're a good dad, Lily said with the absolute confidence of a child. And I can help. I'm good with babies. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Oh? And how do you know that? Jack showed me, she replied simply. In the dreams. I helped him take care of the baby. That connection again, that inexplicable bond that Thomas couldn't begin to understand. He looked at Jack, who sat watching them both with those knowing eyes. What do you think, boy? Should we do this? Jack's tail thumped against the ground, his expression somehow both solemn and hopeful. I think that's a yes, Lily giggled, throwing her arms around the dog's neck. Thomas felt something shift inside him, like puzzle pieces finally falling into place. The past 2 years had been so hard, raising Lily alone after Marion left, watching his vibrant child retreat into silence, struggling to connect with her. Now, through the most unlikely series of events, through the courage and loyalty of an abused dog, something new was emerging, a second chance, a family rebuilt. "Let's go see her," he decided suddenly. "Let's go visit baby Jane." The hospital hallway bustled with afternoon activity as they made their way to the neonatal unit. Thanks to Jack's newfound celebrity status, the staff had made an exception to their usual rules, allowing the dog to visit the baby regularly. They claimed it was for developmental observation, but Thomas suspected they were just as touched by the story as everyone else. Nurse Jenkins met them at the entrance, her round face breaking into a smile. "There's our hero," she said, bending slightly to pet Jack, who accepted the attention politely but kept his eyes fixed on the door beyond. "How's she doing today?" Thomas asked, signing the visitor log. "Much better," the nurse replied. "She's up to 5 pounds now, still small for her age, but gaining steadily. And she's more alert every day." They followed her into the quiet room, where baby Jane's bassinet had been moved once she'd stabilized. The infant was awake, tiny fists waving in the air, dark eyes focusing immediately on the visitors. "She knows us," Lily whispered, stepping closer. Thomas couldn't deny it. The baby's expression visibly brightened at their approach, especially when Jack came into her line of sight. The dog moved forward cautiously, tail wagging gently, and positioned himself beside the bassinet, just as he'd done in those long, lonely days in the cabin. "May I hold her?" Lily asked the nurse. "If you sit in the rocking chair and your dad helps," Nurse Jenkins agreed. Soon Lily was settled in the chair with the baby cradled carefully in her arms, Thomas hovering protectively beside them, Jack sitting at attention at their feet. A perfect tableau. "You all look like you belong together," the nurse commented softly. Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Maybe we do," he murmured. As they sat with the baby, taking turns holding her, Thomas found himself thinking about names. Baby Jane was fine for hospital records, but when she came home with them, she would need a real name, a name that honored her journey and the remarkable dog who had kept her safe. "What should we call her?" he asked Lily quietly. His daughter considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "Something special," she said finally. "Something that means saved." Thomas smiled. "I'll look up some names with that meaning." The peaceful moment was interrupted by the buzz of his phone. Another unknown number, but this time a local area code. Excusing himself, Thomas stepped into the hallway to answer. "Mr. Morgan, this is David Chen from Channel 5 News. I'm sorry to bother you, but we've received some concerning information about Victor Lanes that we thought you should be aware of." Thomas frowned. "What kind of information?" "Our sources at the county jail indicate that Lanes has been making threats, specifically against you, your daughter, and the dog. Apparently, he's been telling his cellmate that he won't let them get away with this, and that nobody takes what's his." A cold knot formed in Thomas's stomach. "Are the police aware of this?" "Yes. Sheriff Cooper has been notified, but given the public interest in your story, we wanted to alert you directly. We're running a piece on the threats tonight, and we wanted to give you a chance to comment or prepare." "No comment," Thomas said automatically, his mind already racing ahead. "Thank you for the heads up." He hung up, leaning against the wall, as he tried to process this new development. Lanes was in jail, awaiting trial. He couldn't hurt them. But the thought of his threats, his anger. "Mr. Morgan, is everything all right?" Nurse Jenkins had stepped into the hallway, concern etched on her face. "Fine," he lied, straightening up. "Just a work call." But as he rejoined Lily and the baby, his unease lingered. Lily seemed to sense it, looking up at him with worried eyes. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Nothing, Lily Pad. Just grown-up stuff." He forced a smile. "Hey, I was thinking maybe we could stop for ice cream on the way home." The distraction worked for Lily, but not for Jack. The dog watched Thomas intently, as if he could sense the new tension, the potential threat. His posture became more alert, his eyes scanning the room with new vigilance. That night, after tucking Lily into bed with Jack settled protectively at her feet, Thomas turned on the local news. As promised, the top story was about Lanes's threats. Convicted animal abuser Victor Lanes, already facing charges of child endangerment and animal cruelty, has allegedly made threats against the Morgan family, who rescued his granddaughter and the German Shepherd, now known to thousands of internet users as Hero Jack, the newscaster reported gravely. Sources inside the county jail report that Lanes has been voicing intentions to reclaim his property once released. The screen switched to Sheriff Cooper, looking uncomfortable in front of the cameras. "We take all threats seriously," he stated. "Mr. Lanes is currently incarcerated and awaiting trial. His bail hearing is scheduled for next week, but given the nature of the charges and these new allegations, we will be recommending that bail be denied." Thomas turned off the TV, unease settling over him like a physical weight. What if Lanes somehow got out? What if he made good on his threats? The idea of anyone harming Lily or Jack, or the baby they hoped to bring home, was unbearable. He checked the locks on the doors and windows, a habit he'd developed since finding Jack. Then he called Sheriff Cooper directly. "I was going to call you in the morning," the sheriff said when he answered. "I'm sorry you had to hear about this from the news." "How serious are these threats?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Lily. "Hard to say. Lanes has always been full of hot air, but given what's at stake, his freedom, his reputation, his granddaughter, I wouldn't dismiss them entirely." "What should I do?" "Be vigilant, but not paranoid. We'll have deputies drive by your place regularly for the next few weeks, and I'm personally going to make sure the judge understands the situation at the bail hearing." After hanging up, Thomas checked on Lily again. She was sleeping peacefully, one arm thrown around Jack's neck. The dog, however, was wide awake, his eyes gleaming in the darkness as he watched Thomas in the doorway. "We'll keep her safe," Thomas whispered. "Both of them. I promise." Jack's tail thumped once against the bed, as if sealing the pact. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Thomas filed paperwork to begin the foster-to-adopt process for baby Jane. He attended meetings with social workers, submitted to background checks, and allowed his home to be inspected. Through it all, Lily remained excitedly optimistic, and Jack stayed vigilant, as if he understood exactly what was at stake. The baby continued to improve, gaining weight and strength. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that she'd be released from the hospital within another week, assuming all continued to go well. Meanwhile, the internet fascination with their story grew. Free Jack evolved into Jack and Baby Jane, with thousands of people following their progress. Donations poured in, not just for Jack's medical care, but for the baby's future as well. A local lawyer offered pro bono services to help with the adoption. A furniture store donated a fully equipped nursery. Even the principal at Lily's school called to say that her teacher had planned a special unit on animal heroes inspired by Jack's story. "It's overwhelming," Thomas admitted to Sheriff Cooper during one of the officer's regular check-ins. "All this attention, some days I can barely keep up with it." "Folks need something to believe in," Cooper replied sagely. "A dog saving a baby, a little girl who starts talking again because of that dog. It's like something out of a movie." Thomas had to agree. Sometimes it felt surreal, like he was living someone else's life. But then Lily would laugh, a sound he'd missed desperately for 2 years, or Jack would rest his head on Thomas's knee with those soulful eyes, and he'd know that all of this was wonderfully, incredibly real. The day before Lanes's bail hearing, Thomas received another call from Diane Reynolds at CPS. "Good news, Mr. Morgan. Your initial home study has been approved. Assuming the judge signs off, baby Jane could be placed with you as early as next week, once she's released from the hospital." Thomas sat down hard, joy and terror mingling in his chest. That's wonderful." "There's more," Diane continued. "Melissa Lanes contacted us again. She's chosen a name for the baby, one she'd like you to use if you're willing." "Of course," Thomas said. "What is it?" "Hope," Diane replied. "She wants her daughter to be called Hope." Hope, the perfect name for a child who had survived against all odds, kept alive by the loyalty of a dog, and found by the determination of a little girl. "Hope," Thomas repeated, tasting the word. "It's perfect." When he told Lily about the name later that evening, her face lit up. "Hope," she said, nodding seriously. "Jack will like that too." As if hearing his name, the dog looked up from his spot by the fireplace, tail wagging gently. "Big day tomorrow," Thomas said, changing the subject. "Lane's bail hearing." Lily's expression darkened slightly. "He's trying to get out?" Thomas hesitated, unsure how much to share with her. She might be only 5, but after everything she'd been through, she deserved honesty. He's going to try, yes, but Sheriff Cooper doesn't think the judge will allow it. He wants to hurt Jack, Lily stated. Not a question, but a certainty. Why do you say that? Jack dreams about him. Bad dreams. He growls in his sleep. Thomas hadn't noticed, but he believed her. The bond between Lily and Jack seemed to transcend normal human-animal relationships. No one is going to hurt Jack, he promised. Or you, or Hope. I won't let that happen. Lily nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with his vow. That night, Thomas again checked all the locks before going to bed, unable to shake the unease that had settled over him since learning of Lanes's threats. Despite Sheriff Cooper's reassurances, he couldn't help feeling that something was coming, some confrontation they couldn't avoid. He was drifting off to sleep when Jack's barking jolted him awake. Not the occasional someone's walking past the house bark, but an urgent, alarmed sound that sent Thomas bolting upright. Throwing on his robe, he rushed to Lily's room first. She was safe, sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he instructed, closing her door firmly before heading downstairs toward the continuing barks. Jack stood at the front window, hackles raised, barking at something outside. Through the glass, Thomas could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across his front yard, moving steadily closer to the house. His heart pounding, Thomas grabbed his phone to call 911, but before he could dial, the kitchen door crashed open with a splintering of wood. Jack tore past him, a blur of fur and fury, racing toward the intruder. "Jack, no!" Thomas shouted, following close behind. The scene in the kitchen froze him in his tracks. Victor Lane stood in the doorway, his weathered face contorted with rage, a hunting knife clutched in one hand. How had he gotten out? Had someone posted his bail? Had he escaped? There was no time to wonder. Jack had planted himself between Lanes and the rest of the house, his injured body trembling with readiness, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Get out of my way, you mangy mutt," Lane snarled, brandishing the knife. "I've come for what's mine." "There's nothing here that belongs to you," Thomas said, finding his voice at last. "The police are on their way." A lie, but Lanes didn't need to know that. Lanes laughed, an ugly sound. "Nice try, but I know you haven't called anyone yet, and by the time you do, I'll be gone, with my granddaughter." Ice flooded Thomas's veins. "Hope isn't here. She's still in the hospital." "Hope?" Lane spat the word. "That what they're calling her now? Fitting, I suppose. Only Hope is a lie, ain't it? Always has been." He took a step forward. Jack's growl deepened, but he didn't attack. Those filed-down teeth would be little defense against the knife. "It's over, Victor," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Even if you somehow got past us, you'd never get to Hope. The hospital has security, and the whole town is watching for you now." Uncertainty flickered in Lanes's bloodshot eyes, but the knife remained steady in his hand. "They can't keep her from me. She's my blood, my family." "Family isn't just blood," Thomas countered. "It's love, protection, sacrifice." He gestured to Jack, still standing guard despite his trembling legs. "That dog has done more for your granddaughter than you ever did." Rage contorted Lanes's features. "You think you're so much better than me? You with your perfect house and your perfect life?" "My life's far from perfect," Thomas said quietly, "but I would never chain a dog to a cart until it bled. I would never leave a baby alone in a cabin in the woods." Jack's barking suddenly changed, becoming sharper, more urgent. Thomas glanced away from Lanes for just a second and saw what Jack had already sensed. Lily stood on the bottom stair, her small face pale with fear but determined. In her hands, she clutched Thomas's phone. "I called Sheriff Cooper," she announced, her voice surprisingly steady. "He's coming right now with his gun." Lanes's gaze darted to Lily, then to the window, as if expecting to see police lights already. His grip on the knife wavered. In that moment of distraction, Jack moved, not attacking, not with those damaged teeth, but positioning himself directly in front of Lily, a living shield. The tableau held for 1 heartbeat, 2. Thomas could almost see the calculations running through Lanes's mind. Even if he somehow got past Jack, even if he somehow subdued Thomas, he'd never make it to the hospital and get to Hope before the police caught him. "It's over, Victor," Thomas repeated. "Put down the knife. Don't make this worse than it already is." For a terrible moment, Thomas thought Lanes might charge anyway, might choose violence out of pure spite, but then the knife clattered to the floor, and the old man's shoulders sagged in defeat. "She's all I got left," he muttered, so quietly Thomas almost missed it. All that's left of my Melissa, my grandbaby. Despite everything, Thomas felt a flicker of pity for the broken man before him. She deserves better than what you gave her. Lanes didn't argue. He just stood there, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. The wail of approaching sirens filled the night, growing steadily louder. Lily moved cautiously down the last step, her hand coming to rest on Jack's head. "You won't hurt him anymore," she said to Lanes, her voice childlike but firm. "You won't hurt anyone." Lanes looked at her, then at Jack, something like recognition flickering in his rheumy eyes. "That dog," he said slowly. "He always knew, didn't he? Always trying to tell someone about the baby. Smarter than most people I know." Before Thomas could respond, the front yard flooded with the red and blue lights of multiple police cars. Sheriff Cooper's voice boomed through a loudspeaker, ordering Lanes to come out with his hands up. The night dissolved into organized chaos, officers securing Lanes, taking statements, photographing the broken door. Through it all, Jack stayed by Lily's side, his vigilance unwavering, even as his exhausted body trembled with the strain. "You're a hero, boy," Thomas told him, kneeling to embrace both Jack and Lily as the police finally led Lanes away. "Both of you are heroes." Lily smiled up at him, no trace of her former silence in her bright eyes. "We protected our family," she said simply. Her words echoed in Thomas's heart long after the police had gone, long after he'd secured the house with temporary repairs, long after he'd tucked Lily back into bed with Jack curled protectively at her feet. Family. That's what they were becoming, what they already were. A father and daughter who had survived abandonment. A dog who had endured unimaginable cruelty, yet maintained his capacity to love and protect. And soon, a baby who had been kept alive by that same dog's devotion. An unlikely family, patched together from broken pieces, but stronger for the breaking perhaps, more appreciative of the bonds they were forging. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Lanes's rearrangement, Hope's imminent release from the hospital, the ongoing foster care process. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of violence averted, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. All of them. 3 months later, the Morgan household buzzed with activity. The living room, once sparse and utilitarian, now overflowed with baby toys, colorful blankets, and the constant, reassuring presence of Jack, who had appointed himself Hope's personal guardian. "I swear that dog doesn't sleep," Thomas commented to Doc Wilson, who had stopped by to check on Jack's progress. "Every time Hope makes even the tiniest sound, he's right there, checking on her." The elderly vet smiled, watching as Jack positioned himself beside Hope's playmat, his body forming a protective barrier between the baby and the rest of the room. Old habits die hard. He spent months being her only caretaker. That kind of bond doesn't just disappear. Hope, now a healthy 7-month-old with chubby cheeks and bright, curious eyes, reached for Jack's tail with delight. The dog allowed this liberty with patient dignity, his gaze softening whenever the baby touched him. "His recovery has been remarkable," Doc Wilson continued, examining Jack's once mangled paws. "The limp is barely noticeable now, and his weight is perfect. You'd hardly know what he went through." Thomas wasn't so sure about that. Sometimes, in the quiet moments of early morning or late evening, he'd catch Jack staring into the distance, a haunted look in those expressive eyes. The physical wounds had healed, yes, but some scars went deeper than skin. "Lily's been helping him," Thomas said, watching his daughter enter the room with a sippy cup of juice. "She says they talk about their bad memories together." Doc Wilson raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. By now, the whole town knew about Lily's special connection with Jack, her belief that she could understand his thoughts, his feelings, his past. Some dismissed it as a child's imagination. Others, like Thomas, had seen too much evidence to doubt. "How's Victor doing?" Doc Wilson asked quietly, mindful of Lily nearby. Thomas sighed. Following his break-in attempt, Lanes had been denied bail and remanded to custody pending trial, but just before the proceedings were to begin, he'd suffered a massive stroke, collapsing in his cell. He now resided in the long-term care ward of the county hospital, partially paralyzed and unable to speak. "The same," Thomas replied. "The doctors don't expect much improvement." Despite everything Lanes had done, Thomas couldn't summon hatred for the broken old man. Anger, yes. Disgust at his actions, certainly. But mostly, he felt pity. Pity for someone who had twisted his pain into cruelty, who had lost everything that might have redeemed him. Melissa visits him occasionally, he added, referring to Lane's daughter, Hope's biological mother. She's doing better, 6 months clean now. She calls every Sunday to talk to Hope. The young woman had surprised them all with her determination to get well, to be part of her daughter's life even if she couldn't raise her. Weekly video calls had turned into monthly supervised visits. Thomas encouraged the relationship, believing that Hope deserved to know her roots, her history, the good parts at least. "And the adoption?" Doc Wilson asked. Thomas smiled. "Final hearing is next month. After that, Hope will legally be a Morgan." "Couldn't have happened to a better family," Doc Wilson said, packing up his medical bag. "You all saved each other in a way." Thomas couldn't argue with that assessment. They had saved each other. A broken man whose wife had abandoned him, a silent child trapped in grief, a dog subjected to unimaginable cruelty, and a baby left to die in a forgotten cabin. Somehow, improbably, they had formed a healing circle, each one's strength supporting another's weakness. After Doc Wilson left, Thomas sat on the floor beside Hope's playmat, watching as Lily showed the baby how to stack colorful plastic rings. Jack supervised this activity with attentive care, occasionally nudging a fallen ring back toward Hope's grasping fingers. "We're famous, you know," Thomas said lightly. "The local news called again yesterday. They want to do a follow-up story now that Hope's officially joining the family." Lily looked up, her expression thoughtful. "Because of Jack? Because he saved Hope?" "Partly," Thomas agreed, "but also because it's a good story, a happy ending. People need those." "It's not an ending," Lily corrected him with the straightforward wisdom of a child. "It's a beginning." Thomas smiled, reaching out to touch her hair. This daughter who had found her voice again, who had transformed from a silent ghost to a confident, caring child. "You're right, Lily Pad. It's definitely a beginning." Jack's ears perked up suddenly, his head swiveling toward the window. A moment later, the doorbell rang. "That's probably Mrs. Hendricks with those casseroles she promised," Thomas said, rising to answer it. But it wasn't their neighbor at the door. Instead, a professional-looking woman in her 30s stood on the porch, a camera crew behind her. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Rebecca Chen from National Morning News. We were hoping to get a few minutes of your time for our Heroes Among Us segment." Thomas blinked in surprise. National Morning News was the biggest morning show in the country, with millions of viewers. We weren't expecting you." Rebecca smiled apologetically. "I know this is unannounced, and I apologize for that, but our producer saw your story online and was deeply moved. The segment airs next week, and we'd love to include Jack in your family." Before Thomas could formulate a response, Lily appeared beside him, Jack at her heels as always. "You want to talk about Jack?" she asked, looking up at the reporter with clear, direct eyes. Rebecca crouched down to Lily's level, her smile genuine. "Yes, we do. Your dog is very special. The whole country wants to hear his story. And yours." Lily considered this seriously, one hand resting on Jack's head. "He wasn't always our dog," she said finally. "He was sad and hurt. But now he's happy. We're all happy." Something in the simple truth of her words seemed to touch the reporter. "That's exactly the kind of story we want to tell," she said softly. "Would that be okay with you?" Lily looked up at Thomas questioningly. He hesitated. The attention their story had already received was overwhelming at times. Did they really want to invite more? But then he thought about what their experience might mean to others, to children feeling lost and silent, to abandoned animals, to broken families looking for hope. "You can come in," he decided, "but I have a few conditions." 20 minutes later, the living room had been transformed into an impromptu television studio. Lights were set up, microphones positioned, camera angles tested. Through it all, Jack remained calm but vigilant, always positioning himself between the strangers and his family, especially Hope. "He's still protective," Rebecca observed as she prepared her notes for the interview. "Always will be," Thomas replied. "It's who he is." The interview began simply enough, with Rebecca asking Thomas to recount how they'd found Jack, the discovery of Hope, and the dramatic confrontation with Lane's. Thomas kept his answers honest but measured, conscious of Lily listening nearby. Then Rebecca turned to Lily directly. And you, young lady, I understand you weren't speaking much before Jack came into your life. Can you tell me about that? Lily, sitting with remarkable poise for a 5-year-old, nodded. My mom left, she said simply, and my words got stuck inside. I didn't know how to get them out. And Jack helped you find them again? He needed me, Lily explained, her hand, as always, resting on the dog's head. He couldn't talk, so I had to talk for him. About the baby. About the hurting. You believe Jack actually communicated with you? Showed you things? Rebecca's tone was gentle, not mocking, but curious. Lily nodded with absolute certainty. In dreams first, then just feelings. Pictures in my head. She looked down at Jack. He remembers everything. Everything? The cabin, the baby crying, the man hurting him. Lily's voice remained steady, recounting horrors with the simple clarity of a child. But he never got mad. He just wanted to help. Rebecca seemed momentarily at a loss for words, touched by Lily's account. That's quite extraordinary. Jack is extraordinary, Thomas agreed. Most people would have given up, shut down completely after what he went through, but he never stopped trying to help, to protect. Even with his teeth filed down and his body injured, he still tried to save the baby, Rebecca clarified for the viewers. He did save her, Lily corrected. Every day, by keeping her warm, by making her not alone. Hope chose that moment to make her presence known, babbling happily from her playmat. Jack immediately got up to check on her, his movement swift but careful. And that's Hope now? Rebecca asked, smiling at the baby's antics. That's our Hope, Thomas confirmed. The final adoption hearing is next month, but she's been part of our family since the day we found her. A remarkable story of resilience and love, Rebecca summarized, turning back to the camera. A dog, abused and exploited, who nonetheless devoted himself to protecting an abandoned infant. A little girl who found her voice again through helping this extraordinary animal. And a father who opened his heart and home to both the dog and the baby, creating a new family from the ashes of tragedy. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering more details of their journey, the public response, the legal proceedings against Lanes, the medical challenges Hope had overcome. Throughout it all, Jack remained a calm, dignified presence, occasionally checking on Hope, but mostly staying pressed against Lily's side, as if lending her his strength. Before we wrap up, Rebecca said finally, there's something else our viewers should know. The German Shepherd Rescue Network has created the Jack Fund in honor of your dog, dedicated to rehabilitating abused working dogs and finding them loving homes. They've already raised over $50,000. Thomas was speechless. I had no idea. Your story has touched people across the country, Mr. Morgan. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is potential for extraordinary compassion and courage. After the camera crew packed up and left, promising that the segment would air the following Tuesday, Thomas sat on the porch swing with Lily beside him and Jack at their feet. Hope napped peacefully inside, monitored by the baby monitor clipped to Thomas's belt. That was something, wasn't it? He said, still processing the surreal experience of having their story broadcast to the nation. Lily nodded, uncharacteristically quiet now that the excitement had passed. You okay, Lily Pad? She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. Jack has a brother. Thomas startled. What do you mean? In the dreams, the sad memories, there was another dog, smaller, brown spots. They grew up together until the bad man took Jack away. Thomas felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. This was new information, something no one had ever mentioned. Jack had a brother, another dog that Lanes owned? Lily nodded solemnly. Jack misses him, worries about him. Thomas studied his daughter's face, torn between dismissing this as imagination and acknowledging the uncanny accuracy of her previous messages from Jack. Did Jack tell you where this other dog might be? With the lady who smells like flowers, near water. It wasn't much to go on, but Thomas had learned not to discount Lily's insights. I'll talk to Sheriff Cooper tomorrow, he promised. See if he knows anything about another dog that Lanes might have had. Lily smiled, satisfied with his response, and leaned against his side. Jack sighed contentedly at their feet, his eyes closing in the warm afternoon sun. Later that night, after both Lily and Hope were asleep, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, searching for any mention of a second dog in Lanes's possession. He found nothing in the news articles about their case, nothing in the public records he could access. As he was about to give up for the night, an email notification popped up on his screen. It was from Rebecca Chen, the reporter who had interviewed them earlier. "Mr. Morgan," it read, "in reviewing some of our B-roll footage from today, our editor noticed something interesting in one of the background shots of your daughter's drawings on the refrigerator. It appears to show 2 dogs, not just one. Given your amazing story, I wondered if there might be more to tell. If you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear about it." Thomas moved to the refrigerator, where Lily's artwork was displayed. Among the colorful drawings was one he hadn't paid much attention to, a picture of Jack, recognizable by his German Shepherd coloring, standing beside a smaller dog with brown spots. Between them was a crude representation of Hope in her blanket. "Jack's brother," Thomas whispered, a mix of awe and uncertainty washing over him. How had Lily known? And more importantly, was there really another dog out there somewhere, one that had been important to Jack? He picked up his phone and called Sheriff Cooper, despite the late hour. "Thomas, everything okay?" The sheriff's voice was alert despite being woken up. "I'm not sure," Thomas replied honestly. "This might sound crazy, but did Lanes ever mention having another dog? Besides Jack, I mean. A smaller one with brown spots?" A long pause followed. "That's an odd question at midnight. Any particular reason you're asking?" Thomas explained about Lily's drawing, her claim that Jack had a brother he was separated from. To his surprise, Cooper didn't dismiss the inquiry outright. "Now that you mention it, I remember something from the initial investigation after we arrested Lanes. One of the neighbors mentioned that he used to have 2 dogs, but hadn't seen the smaller one in months. We assumed it had died or run off." Hope stirred over the baby monitor, and Thomas instinctively looked toward the stairs, knowing Jack would already be alert, checking on her. "The neighbor's name was Florence Gardner," Cooper continued. "Lives about a mile from Lanes's property, down by the creek. Older lady, keeps a bunch of flower gardens. The guys at the station call her Flower Lady. A lady who smells like flowers, near water." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "I'd like to talk to her," he said, "first thing tomorrow, if possible." "I'll give her a call in the morning, let her know you might be stopping by," Cooper promised. "But, Thomas, don't get your hopes up. It's been months. If there was another dog—" "I know," Thomas said, "but I have to check, for Jack's sake." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day. Thomas had explained the situation to Lily over breakfast, trying to manage her expectations while honoring her insight. "We're going to visit a lady who might know about Jack's brother," he said carefully. "But, Lilypad, we don't know for sure if he's still alive or if she has him. So, we need to be prepared for disappointment, okay?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Jack knows he's alive, just scared and lonely." Thomas exchanged glances with Jack, who sat alert beside Lily's chair, seemingly understanding every word. "Well, we'll see." After arranging for Mrs. Hendricks to watch Hope for a few hours, Thomas, Lily, and Jack piled into the truck. The drive to Florence Gardner's property took only about 15 minutes, winding along the creek that eventually ran behind Lanes's cabin. The Flower Lady lived up to her nickname. Her modest house was surrounded by elaborate gardens, a riot of spring blooms creating a fragrant paradise. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Thomas could see why Lily had described her as the lady who smells like flowers. An elderly woman emerged from the house as they parked, wiping her hands on a garden apron. Her white hair was tied back in a practical bun, her weathered face kind but cautious. "Sheriff Cooper called about you," she said by way of greeting. "Said you were asking about Victor's other dog." Thomas nodded, helping Lily out of the truck before letting Jack jump down. "Yes, ma'am! We were wondering if you knew what happened to it." Florence's eyes widened as she took in Jack, recognition dawning. "Why, that's Victor's German Shepherd, the one from the news." "This is Jack," Lily said proudly. "He saved a baby." "So I heard," Florence replied, her expression softening as she looked at Lily. "The whole county's been talking about it." Jack, meanwhile, was acting strangely. He stood rigid, nose lifted to the air, tail beginning to wag with increasing speed. A low whine built in his throat, not of distress, but of anticipation. Florence noticed his behavior and smiled. "I think he knows," she said softly. "Knows what?" Thomas asked, his heart beginning to race. Instead of answering, Florence turned toward her house and gave a gentle whistle. "Buddy, come here, boy." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the front door pushed open, and a smaller dog emerged, a beagle mix with distinctive brown spots on his white coat. He moved cautiously, almost timidly, until he caught sight of Jack. What happened next left Thomas speechless. Both dogs froze, staring at each other across the garden path. Then, with a joyful bark that seemed to contain years of longing, Jack bounded forward. The smaller dog raced to meet him, and they collided in a whirlwind of wagging tails, sniffing noses, and soft whines. "Jack's brother," Lily whispered, her face alight with vindication. "I told you." Florence wiped a tear from her eye as she watched the reunion. "I found him about 4 months ago, half-starved and terrified, hiding under my porch. Took me a week just to get him to come inside. Poor thing was covered in scars, and so afraid of people, especially men." "How did you know he was Lane's dog?" Thomas asked, his own throat tight with emotion as he watched the two dogs circle each other, checking every inch, reaffirming a bond long broken. "Didn't at first," Florence admitted, "but he had this half-torn collar with the letter B still visible. And I remembered Victor used to have 2 dogs, the big shepherd that pulled his cart, and a smaller one that just disappeared one day. When I asked him about it, he said something vague about the little one being too soft for work." Thomas could imagine what that meant. Lane's had kept the stronger dog for labor and discarded the one that couldn't serve his purposes. "They were from the same litter," Florence continued. "At least, that's what Victor told me years ago when they were puppies. Not pure breeds, but brothers nonetheless." Lily had moved closer to the reunited dogs, her small hand extended. Buddy, as Florence called him, shrank back slightly but didn't run. "It's okay," Lily told him softly. "Jack kept your baby safe, and now we keep Jack safe." Buddy looked from Lily to Jack, then back again, something like understanding passing between them. Slowly, cautiously, he moved forward to sniff her hand. "He's still very nervous around strangers," Florence explained, "especially children. But he's coming along, he sleeps in my bed now, and he's gained back most of his weight." Thomas watched the interaction, a thought forming in his mind. A crazy, impulsive, probably irresponsible thought. "Ms. Gardner," he began carefully, "would you consider, that is, do you think Buddy might benefit from spending time with Jack? Maybe even—" Florence smiled, seeming to read his mind. "Wondering if I'd let you adopt him, reunite the brothers permanently?" Thomas nodded, somewhat embarrassed by his presumption. "I know it's asking a lot. You've clearly done wonders with him already. And our household is pretty full with a 5-year-old and a baby. And a famous rescue dog," Florence added with a twinkle in her eye. "Quite the full house." "It is," Thomas admitted, "but seeing them together—" He gestured to the dogs, who had settled down side by side, Jack's larger body protectively curved around his smaller brother. "It seems wrong to separate them again." Florence was quiet for a long moment, watching the dogs with a thoughtful expression. "I'm an old woman, Mr. Morgan. I've lived alone since my Herbert passed 12 years ago. Buddy has been good company these past few months, and I'd miss him terribly." She paused, her gaze shifting to Lily, who was now sitting on the ground beside both dogs, talking to them softly. "But I can see what they mean to each other, and what your family could mean to Buddy." "We could visit," Thomas suggested quickly. "Bring both dogs over regularly. You'd be part of our extended family, not losing Buddy entirely." A smile spread across Florence's weathered face. "I'd like that very much. It gets lonely out here sometimes, even with all my flowers for company." They spent the rest of the morning at Florence's house, working out the details of what Thomas mentally termed a shared custody arrangement for Buddy. The smaller dog gradually warmed up to them, especially after seeing how completely Jack trusted them. By the time they left, with a promise to return the following weekend, Buddy had even allowed Lily to scratch behind his ears, a major breakthrough, according to Florence. "Jack has a brother," Lily announced triumphantly as they drove home. "Just like I said." Thomas couldn't argue with that. "You were right, Lily Pad. Absolutely right." In the back seat, Jack sat with his nose pressed to the window, watching Florence's house recede in the distance. Thomas could almost imagine his thoughts. Not goodbye, but see you soon. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Thomas stood in the backyard watching the scene before him with a heart so full it threatened to overflow. Lily, now 6 and in first grade, was teaching Hope to throw a ball, the baby's chubby hands releasing it with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Jack and Buddy raced after each wild throw, the smaller dog having overcome much of his former fear in the months since joining their family. Florence sat in a lawn chair nearby, her knitting needles clicking steadily as she worked on what would be Hope's winter hat. She had become a regular visitor, a grandmother figure for the children and a friend for Thomas, her wisdom and gentle humor a welcome addition to their lives. The yard itself had been transformed. The once simple space now boasted a sturdy fence, donated by a local construction company touched by their story, a small playhouse painted in cheerful colors, and even a dedicated dog run where Jack and Buddy could exercise safely. "Beautiful sight," Sheriff Cooper commented, joining Thomas by the grill, where hamburgers sizzled for their Sunday dinner. "Hard to believe it's only been a year since you found Jack." Thomas nodded, flipping a burger with practiced ease. "Sometimes it feels like he's always been part of our family, like we were just waiting for him to find us. And now look at you, 2 kids, 2 dogs, a surrogate grandmother, and more friends than you can count." Cooper gestured to the other guests scattered around the yard. Doc Wilson chatting with Nurse Jenkins, who had cared for Hope in the hospital, David Chen from the local news station, and his wife, several neighbors who had supported them through the difficult times. "It takes a village," Thomas said with a smile, "or in our case, a very determined dog and a little girl who refused to stay silent." "Speaking of determined," Cooper said, lowering his voice slightly, "I wanted to let you know that Melissa has completed her rehab program. She's got a job now, an apartment, still attending meetings every day." Thomas nodded, having kept in regular contact with Hope's biological mother. "She mentioned she might stop by later today, just for a little while, to see Hope." "And you're okay with that?" Cooper asked carefully. "More than okay," Thomas replied honestly. "Hope deserves to know where she came from, and Melissa deserves a chance to be part of her life, even if it's not as her primary caretaker." A shriek of delight drew their attention back to the yard, where Buddy had finally conquered his fear of the play tunnel and was racing through it to Lily's enthusiastic applause. Jack sat nearby, watching with what Thomas could only describe as brotherly pride. 2 brothers, separated by cruelty, reunited by love, Cooper mused. If someone wrote it as fiction, nobody would believe it. Thomas had to agree. Their story, from Jack's rescue to Hope's adoption, from Lily finding her voice to Buddy finding his courage, seemed too perfectly orchestrated to be real. And yet, here they were, living proof that sometimes the most broken pieces could form the most beautiful mosaic. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Hope was tucked into her crib, Thomas sat on the porch swing with Lily between him and Florence. The 2 dogs sprawled contentedly at their feet. The night was clear, stars sprinkled across the velvet sky like diamonds. "Jack has happy dreams now," Lily announced suddenly, her head resting against Thomas's arm. "Does he?" Thomas asked, still fascinated by his daughter's conviction that she could read the dog's thoughts, his memories, his dreams. Lily nodded solemnly. "He dreams about all of us together, and about saving other dogs and babies." "That would be quite a job for one dog," Florence remarked with a gentle smile. "Not just Jack," Lily corrected. "All of us. We can all save somebody." Thomas looked down at his daughter, struck once again by the wisdom that sometimes emerged from her childish observations. She was right, of course. Each of them had saved another in some way. Jack had saved Hope and helped Lily find her voice. Lily had saved Jack from lanes and helped Buddy overcome his fear. Thomas had given them all a home, a family, and Hope, by her very existence, had given them all a renewed sense of purpose. Even Florence had played her part, tending to Buddy when he was lost and afraid, and now bringing her warmth and wisdom into their expanding circle. "You're a pretty smart kid, you know that?" Thomas said, dropping a kiss on Lily's head. She smiled up at him, that open, uninhibited smile that had once been lost behind years of silence. "Jack taught me," she said simply. "He says the smartest thing is to love, even when it's hard." Thomas glanced down at the German Shepherd, his once broken body now strong and healthy, his eyes peaceful as he dozed beside his brother. What a journey they had all taken together, from chains and silence and abandonment to this moment of perfect contentment. "Jack's right," he said softly. "That's the smartest thing of all." The dogs, hearing their names, looked up in unison, tails thumping gently against the porch boards. In their eyes, one pair confident and wise, the other still occasionally haunted but increasingly trusting, Thomas saw the reflection of their extraordinary bond, the unspoken connection that had brought them all to this place, this moment. A family forged in hardship, strengthened by love, and bound together by the courage of a dog who had refused to give up hope, who had kept a baby alive, awakened a child's voice, and taught a man to believe in second chances. "What do you think our next adventure will be?" Lily asked sleepily, her eyes beginning to close as the evening's excitement caught up with her. Thomas smiled, drawing her closer. "I don't know, Lily Pad, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." Jack's tail thumped once more in agreement, a promise, a pledge, a reminder of the bond that would never be broken again. Together, all of them, always. The end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of hope, the healing nature of love, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. And don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from.